This is an NFL free agency preview of First and Pod. Andrew Fillipponi. Patrick Peterson is off. Spencer Ray is never off, and he is actually, that's not true. I think we were talking about him taking a vacation maybe a month from now, the last time we chatted before a show. But eventually he'll find respite and find some relaxation, but it's not right now because free agency for all intents and purposes begins on Monday. That's when legal tampering starts. Anyone who's been around the NFL knows that's when the deals get made. So if you're listening to this right now, Monday night, Tuesday morning, whenever you are, we are now down to days, not weeks, until we find out what happens with all these big free agents and probably some trade candidates too. We've already seen the Deebo Samuel domino fall, and that is one of the things we'll get to here on the podcast. Pretty simple stuff here. This is regular football talk. We don't go in over your head. We don't bog you down with X's and O's. We do 90% of the time, if not more, have one of the great NFL players from the last 20 years as a co-host on this podcast. So you get expert analysis from him. And I like to mix things up and just give you my 2 cents. So if you're into that kind of stuff, it's really easy. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Give it a rating, a 5-star rating, and then leave a brief review. And that helps us grow the podcast. All right, so now that that's out of the way, here's how we're going to do this episode. I've basically broken down the NFL in this free agency period into the haves and have-nots, the teams who have the money and the ones who don't. So I've bunched some teams together here just for time purposes. So we'll do what we've done since this podcast was created, since its inception. We'll do every team. We'll do all 32, but we'll pair some teams up with each other to get through this more quickly and make it easier for you to consume the whole thing. And the teams that we bunch together or link together have something in common with each other. So that's how we'll do it. I elected to start or sort this out, beginning with the team that has the most money in free agency on down to the team that has the least amount of money in free agency. And so New England is going to kick us off. The Patriots have $130 million to spend in free agency. And I also want to touch on the Bucs here, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, believe it or not, to start the podcast, because I think they're going to lose a player to New England because of all the cash that's burning a hole in New England's pocket right now. That free agent is probably going to be Chris Godwin because New England is not going to get the player they initially wanted in free agency, that being Tee Higgins, because of the Bengals having the franchise tag placed on him. So the consolation prize wide receiver wise would be Chris Godwin, who's coming off another injury, but when he plays is, really good. I would say, when I say really good, I'm talking about a guy that is a volume catch guy, someone that is very reliable when he plays and is healthy for 5+ catches a game and more than 50 yards a game. I mean, he is the ideal number 2 wide receiver. In New England's offense, he would get elevated and promoted to number 1 because they don't really have any wide receivers there. That was part of the issue. And that's why I was so impressed by Drake May last year. One of the things that impressed me. And he gets better coaching this year. Mike Vrabel now the head coach. And the question here really for me is, can New England turn it around in one offseason? Can they be one of these teams that goes worst to first like the Commanders last year, the Bengals in Joe Burrow's second year? Can they be one of those teams? Now, when I say worst to first, okay, I don't think they're going to catch Buffalo. I don't think they're going to catch the Bills. I mean, we have seen teams like San Francisco last year got beset by injuries, and everybody thought they would be great, and they ended up with a losing record. So there's usually 1 or 2 of those teams every year, but I'm not going to predict it for the Bills yet. But I do have a lot of confidence and belief in the Patriots, and not because of the mystical Patriots way or the fact that they were so good for 20 years with Belichick and Brady. I am a Drake May guy. You are listening to the voice of someone who would have taken him stupidly now over Jaden Daniels in the last draft. I liked him more than Caleb Williams. I said that repeatedly on this podcast. And I thought when he went in on a team that was built to lose, built to fail, they fired the coach after one season, Mayo. Their offensive line was in shambles. They had no real weapons. Ramondre Stevenson and Hunter Henry were the two best playmakers in the offense. I thought he looked great given the circumstances. And the game that sticks out to me still is when he went to Buffalo and had the Bills on the ropes, and Buffalo was down 2 touchdowns early in that game. And they came back and they won. But Drake May, against one of the top defenses in the league, balled out in that game. And then there was a rematch in week 18, but the Patriots were tanking, and they played Joe Milton for most of it. So I think May has a ton of upside. I think he has a chance to be a top 10 quarterback in the league this year with better coaching and better players around him. So yes, I think they can go from one of the worst teams in the NFL to a playoff team in 2025, even though the AFC is loaded with really good quarterback play, and it's easier to have these overnight turnarounds in the NFC than it is the AFC. Next up, cap space-wise, the Raiders. And I'm going to lump them in with the Rams. So we'll do Vegas and LA here because of what happened with Matthew Stafford. So Vegas loses out on Stafford. Brady and Stafford met. The manner in which they met caused 2 insiders to almost fight in a Starbucks. And that went viral hilariously. And there were pictures that went out and everything else. And I would consider myself better friends with Jordan Schultz because I actually know him and I don't know Ian Rappaport at all. So I was rooting for Jordan Schultz if that thing came to blows for him to win the fight. It didn't happen, and Spencer agrees, Jordan is a good guy. He absolutely is. Some jokes have been made about where he comes from. He does not act like someone whose father is the CEO or was the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. Okay, so I've got a lot of respect for that guy. And so I believe him that Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady didn't just bump into each other when they were both in Montana. The Raiders put on the full court press. It didn't work. My question for this one is, what should the Raiders do at quarterback now? And just told you I'm a Drake May guy. I think I'm turning into a Shedeur Sanders guy because of a lot of the negativity that's out there around him right now. I think he's a high floor, low ceiling quarterback. He reminds me a lot of Matt Ryan. People don't get that comparison because Matt Ryan was not a very athletic quarterback and was purely a pocket guy. And if you watch Sanders at Colorado, you see the same thing. He's nothing like his dad. His dad's one of the great athletes in sports history, period. And Sanders is just a pocket quarterback. Played with a horrible offensive line. He had Hunter and Jimmy Horn to throw the ball to, so he had good weapons, great weapons actually, in the Big 12. I mean, he didn't play in the SEC, but he's excelled at every level. He was great at Jackson State. He put Colorado on the map with his dad. They won 10 games. So I do think he's someone that lifts those around him. I do think he's a rising tide quarterback. And so that's what I would do if he's there for the Raiders at 6, is take him. And then as far as the Rams go, man, things got smoothed over awfully easily or quickly there, where you had Kelly Stafford go on her podcast and say things like, we just want to be respected. You had McVay, I think, when he went on the Whitworth and Ryan Fitzpatrick podcast, make it sound like, yeah, we love Matthew Stafford, but, like, there's a business to football. And then there were, rumblings about Aaron Rodgers and even Sam Darnold there. So I do think ultimately they made the right move, because now I'm going to sound like I just love every quarterback in the league, but I'm also a big Matthew Stafford guy. And I still think even though he's in his getting into his late 30s, he's still good enough to win a Super Bowl with, like he did with the Rams a few years ago. So it would have been huge for the Raiders to get him. That would have made them probably a playoff team, or just about in the crowded AFC, where their division had 3 playoff teams last year. But I don't think all hope is lost there because of all the cap space I mentioned, and they can still draft Sanders. And I think he'll be ready to play and be pretty decent right from the jump. All right, Bears have more cap space than any NFC team, and I decided to tag them with the Chiefs of all teams. And let me explain why. it was rumored and it was reported in Chicago that the guy that they wanted to sign in free agency, and they pretty much got the hammer on 30 NFL or 29 other teams. The only teams that could really outbid them would be the Patriots and Raiders, who we just touched on. That the Bears were ready to empty their account on Trey Smith, the Kansas City guard. And shockingly, Smith got franchise tagged by the Chiefs. No one saw that coming. Schefter didn't even see that coming. And so now he's off the table. So they've got to find offensive linemen there to protect Caleb Williams. So the Chiefs keep one of their own. I thought for sure he was gone. They might have to skimp on tackle, which really isn't smart. But all these coaches say quarterbacks hate pressure up the middle. Well, pressure off the edge is also what screwed the Chiefs in that Super Bowl, and you've got Creed Humphrey there to help out guards. So I'm actually confused by them tagging him and spending so much money on a guard, given what else they need offensively, and with Kelsey coming back. Will a revamped offensive line in Chicago make Caleb Williams an elite quarterback? I think that's what Bears fans are expecting. I don't think they're hoping. I think they're expecting it. I think they really believe that last offseason they made moves like Caleb Williams, like Rome Odunze, like trading for Keenan Allen. They made personnel moves that made not just Bears fans, but made NFL media believe that the Bears, not the Commanders, were going to be the team led by a rookie quarterback that made it to the playoffs. This year, it's the coaching change and the Ben Johnson effect. But I'm still not a Caleb Williams guy. I still think he's someone that's a little too erratic for me and up and down. And so I'm going to be late to the party on them. I'm one of these guys that gets things wrong because it's sports and nobody gets everything right. And when I'm wrong, I'm not someone who's just going to pretend like I wasn't. I thought Kenny Pickett was going to be a great quarterback for the Steelers. Really stupid opinion. I didn't think Jaden Daniels was going to be good. Very, 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 very dumb thing to say. But just having watched a lot of Caleb Williams, I'm not someone who believes that he's going to be able to get it done. Yes, and Kenny Pickett does have a ring now, so maybe I should start rubbing that back in people's face. Cardinals and Eagles. These two teams are intertwined. The Cardinals have the fourth most cap space because Arizona, given the head coach there, Jonathan Gannon, who came from Philly, he was the defensive coordinator there the last time, when the Eagles lost the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. And they are linked to Eagles free agents because of that. The defensive guys, Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. Milton Williams was on the short list of guys who I guess you could have made an argument for as Super Bowl MVP. Sweat too, actually. What am I talking about? Both of those guys could have been Super Bowl MVP. How much would those losses hurt Philly's D? Not a lot. Not a ton. Because Fangio's still there, and the most impactful, important players are still there. And I would describe those guys as Jalen Carter, obviously, up the middle. And now they're young corners, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. Now, you mentioned I did not say Zach Bond. We'll get to Zach Bond later in the podcast. Zach Bond was great for them. He was signed for almost nothing and from New Orleans as a special teams guy and was a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. So his name has not been as closely linked to Arizona, but Williams, the defensive tackle who came on like gangbusters this year, and Sweat have. Remember, Sweat really played because they traded Hassan Reddick to the Jets, and Williams basically beat out another first-round pick, Jordan Davis, for playing time. So they drafted so well. They got incredible depth. And I think it's one of those situations where guys get rich, get paid when a team wins a Super Bowl because everybody wants to say, let's bring this guy in. He comes from a winning culture. And I think they're going to lose guys like that. But I don't think Philly's defense is going to skip a beat with those departures. Chargers and Bills. Okay, here's why I put the Chargers and Bills together. Because it sounds like Khalil Mack is not going to get re-signed before Monday. And Buffalo, I think, they don't have a ton of cap space. The Chargers are the team that has a lot of cap space. So really, both of these teams, I think, are in similar kind of quandaries. So if LA lets Mack walk, then they're going to have even more money to go out and get offensive playmakers for Justin Herbert. And I brought up Chris Godwin to the Patriots. I think LA in theory could be a candidate for his services too. Harbaugh having coached against Godwin when Godwin was at Penn State, the Big Ten connection. And he's also he's a great, smart, not just football player, but bright kid. I mean, he'd fit in, hard worker. He'd fit into their locker room so easily. I mean, he's the anti-diva wide receiver. And so that Harbaugh has an affinity for guys like that. He'd rather have the hard worker and the smart football player than the uber talented one. So it sounds like the Chargers are going to go that route. And that leaves a team like the Bills here to make another decision. Do the Bills try to sign a wide receiver, trade for a wide receiver, or do they try to find a defensive playmaker? Because I think what we saw in the AFC Championship game compared to the Super Bowl is that the Philly front could get home against Patrick Mahomes, and the Bills defense really couldn't. And Von Miller was a good situational player, really never turned into the guy they thought they were getting when they signed him after he won a Super Bowl with the Rams. And Greg Rousseau, the other edge rusher, I think is more of a complimentary guy than he is a star. And last point on this, remember, Mack played at Buffalo. He played at the University of Buffalo. So Spence points out Von has a crazy cap hit, but see what it would take to cut him, Spence, because I would be shocked if he actually saw that money given the way he sporadically plays there now. They need, and I think Mack still has it, and we've seen some of these edge rushers have long careers into their mid to late 30s where they're still very effective players. I think for Buffalo, it's worth a roll of the dice. So $15 million in dead cap if they cut him. Von Miller, I think they probably will. I think that could happen in the next few days, as a matter of fact, before the new year gets here and do one of those post June 1st designation things, all that salary cap mumbo jumbo that NFL fans know all about. So I'm keeping my eye on that. The next time we talk will be a reaction to free agency. I'm calling it now. I think Khalil Mack goes back to Buffalo and plays for the Bills. Commanders and 49ers. My bad. We probably should have had this way higher up on the rundown. And that is the Deebo Samuel trade. And I'm just going to give you my thoughts on it. And this is probably why I didn't have it higher in the rundown. I think it's an overrated move for Washington. I don't like it for them at all. I know they only had to give up a 5th-round pick, but they got to eat the Deebo Samuel salary. And I just don't think he's anywhere close to the player he was even 2 years ago. I think in theory, if you're looking at it right here on paper, I'm holding it up for our video stream, what he used to be as a guy that could do it all, wide receiver, running back, direct snap it to him, slot outside, hard-nosed, put his helmet down and run you over, run past you. I mean, when they went to the Super Bowl, I would say the first time, the guy was an electrifying player. He's not that anymore. I think there's a lot of hard mileage on him. And with all the money Washington has, I would have looked elsewhere. I mean, maybe this is another reaction to what it probably is, actually. I'm not going to say I hate when people try to equivocate like that. It probably is a reaction to Tee Higgins staying put in Cincinnati, that a team like Washington would have to pivot, because Washington, even though they have less money than New England and LA, the Chargers, as teams who need wide receivers, would have sold Higgins probably on playing with Jaden Daniels. And if the money was even remotely close, he elects to go play there, I would guess. But I'm not a fan of this trade for them. I think it's not going to give them the impact that they want. And yes, that what they gave up wasn't a lot, but what they're paying Deebo Samuel is way more than he's worth. And for San Francisco, this is why you pay Kyle Shanahan all that money. This is why Shanahan is your head coach, because you should be able to filter out these guys. And when they are on the cusp of or have already outlived their usefulness, you move on and you don't miss out. You don't feel like you lost anything. You don't feel like you're, rebuilding at that position or anything like that. You drafted Pearsall last year. You paid Jennings, who had a big breakout year. You go draft somebody in the middle rounds, or you pick up somebody on the cheap in free agency because you're going to have to pay Brock Purdy. I wouldn't, but they will. And that's why Shanahan is your head coach. That's like Bill Belichick cutting veteran players and trading defensive guys when he did because he was such a defensive mastermind. It's the same concept here. If Kyle Shanahan is really the best offensive coach in the league or thereabouts after Andy Reid and maybe Sean McVay, you should be able to move on from Deebo Samuel and find his replacement and maybe even find someone who's better. Vikings and Steelers. These two teams have quarterback questions. That's why I've lumped them in together on our NFL free agency preview podcast. It sounds right now like Sam Darnold is going to hit the free agent market, and he's not going to sign before legal tampering starts on Monday. Should the Steelers want him? My answer is no. No, they should not. And you might say, oh, well, you're just a Steelers fan that has sky-high expectations, and you should be happy that they make the playoffs every year. They can get to the playoffs they've shown it, with Mason Rudolph at quarterback 2 years ago. They went to the playoffs with the ghost of Russell Wilson this year. You don't need to pay Sam Darnold $30 to $40 million a year to merely make the playoffs. We saw Sam Darnold in a perfect system with the coach of the year, Kevin O'Connell, with the best wide receiver in the NFL. We saw him show his true colors the last 2 games of the season. Now, he threw 30 touchdowns, okay? So don't take that as me saying that I think Darnold is trash. I don't. I think he's good enough to be a starting quarterback. I think he makes sense for a few other teams. He doesn't for Pittsburgh. He can elevate a team with the right coaching to the playoffs. The Steelers need to start winning playoff games. They haven't since 2016. They've gone 8 years. And so what do they do? What do the Steelers do? My opinion would be, my advice would be to draft someone, not in the first round, because you're not going to get a quarterback at 21. I would basically play a young guy this year. I would not bring back Fields. I would not sign Aaron Rodgers. Now that the Matthew Stafford ship has sailed, that would have been my number one choice. But that would be my plan. My plan would be to go with a young guy. And this is going to sound nuts because I just said Darnold can't win in the playoffs. The only veteran guy who I'm the least bit, and it's not a lot, it's a tiny bit, interested in for the Steelers would be Kirk Cousins for this reason. He would cost nothing, just like Russell Wilson costs nothing. So if I know my team is not going to win the Super Bowl and the Steelers can't do it, it makes 0 sense to pay Justin Fields $20 million a year or Russell Wilson $25 million a year. I could spend $20 or $25 million and get a premium player at another position. Or I could get 2 very good players at 2 positions I need. It's the same situation with Cousins that we had with Wilson, where the Falcons are going to have to pay him his salary. So it won't happen. It won't happen. But that's what I would advise or recommend the Steelers do in this situation. Go young. Go with a Will Howard, even though he had a horrible combine. a Jalen Milroe who also does not throw an accurate ball. Well, who cares? You're not going to win this year. I'd rather flip a coin on somebody. Jackson Dart, sure. I'd rather take a chance on a young guy than run it back with dudes and pay them too much money to go 9-8. All right, Bengals and Seahawks. And here's why I put the Seahawks with the Bengals, because it sounds like they've got a decision to make on DK Metcalf. But it seems like, based on the information we have right now as we're taping this podcast, that Cincinnati Bengals insiders think Tee Higgins is going to get an extension from Cincinnati. And I'm shocked by that. I'm stunned by that. Now, this kind of adds fuel to the fire when people say the salary cap is made up and make believe. It's going to cost a lot of money out of pocket for a very frugal owner to sign new deals to Chase and Higgins in one offseason. Now, the nuclear option would be this, and I just can't see this happening. When these insiders say they're going to pay Higgins, does that mean that Higgins gets a contract and they don't pay Chase? And Chase plays this year on the last year of his deal? I mean, he had a hissy fit going into this season. So that seems like it's unlikely or very improbable. But it's also far-fetched to think that they'll pay both guys. So that's out there. People close to the situation now seem to think that that's going to happen. And if it does, that's why I tied the Seahawks into this. There was talk at the Combine that the Packers were interested, which I thought was odd that they would want DK Metcalf, given the fact that Green Bay has a bunch of good young receivers, no elite ones, but a bunch of good ones. So why would they want to give up draft capital for a wide receiver when wide receiver really is not a problem area for them? But maybe they look at it like, why let good be the enemy of great? We've got 4 or 5, 2 and 3 receivers. Let's use them or use a draft pick to get a legit number 1. And Seattle, I think, Tyler Lockett's going to leave, but they look at Jackson Smith and Jigma now as the dude. I would not do it, though, if I'm Seattle, because I actually think Seattle this year is under the radar because I like their coach so much. I think he can work wonders with their defense. Their offensive line was incredibly banged up all of last year, and Kenneth Walker barely played. So I like Seattle for next year, and unless the team's going to offer them a first-round pick for DK Metcalf, I would not trade him. Speaking of draft picks, Titans and Browns, those are the two teams that are going to pick 1-2. The consensus seems to be that the Titans won't draft a quarterback. Is that smart? No, that's not smart. Now, here's why I don't like this. I'm just going to come right out and say it. This happens all the time where NFL media and NFL draft people start projecting next year's draft before a college football season even happens. So what you're hearing right now is, well, Tennessee can just wait to take their quarterback next year. None of the quarterbacks in this draft are any good. Why not just wait until next season and take a quarterback then? Here's what I would say to that. Why not just do both? Okay, like if you draft, say, Cam Ward, number 1 overall, and the guy stinks. Brian Callahan, his dad's Bill. Brian's going to get fired, and you're going to bring in a new head coach anyways. And in my opinion, it would be a situation like with Josh Rosen and Kyler Murray. Now, that was not a number 1 overall pick from the year before, but the reason why I think it would make more sense to do that is, Cam Ward is a veteran quarterback. He's not a guy that played 10 games in college. He played at 3 schools. He played at Immaculate Word. He played at Wash State. He played for Miami. So he's in his mid-20s. If you give him 17 games and he's mediocre or not good, and you go 3-14 or 4-13 or whatever, and you're right back at the top of the draft next year, and that college season is as good as everybody makes it out, or this college crop for 2026 is as good as everybody makes it out to be, and it's as good as advertised, then take the guy again. The other thing is, if you like Cam Ward, and I think Cam Ward has certain skills that are interesting, like he's a bigger, mobile guy with arm strength who's also made each team he's played for better, significantly better. I don't think that that's by coincidence. So I don't think he's a system quarterback by any means, is what I'm saying. There's no guarantee that Cooper Manning or Arch Manning, now I've got my Mannings confused too. There's no guarantee that Arch Manning or Drew Aller or the kid at South Carolina are better than Cam Ward right now. Draft experts and NFL media act like they are. Carson Beck, another guy. Again, Carson Beck, I thought at Georgia was an underachiever. And if he had gone into this draft, I think he'd be a day 2, maybe day 3 pick. So I don't think he's worth waiting on. Bottom line is, if Tennessee, now they just got a new GM, but everything Tennessee has this year is going to look like crap unless they get the right quarterback in there. So unless you're telling me they're going to go Sam Darnold and Travis Hunter, I could listen to that. But I would feel better as a Titans fan if I, say, had Cam Ward and then I signed a free agent wide receiver, then tried to make Sam Darnold into a great quarterback or an elite quarterback on his 5th team. And then I threw the Browns in there too because they have the 2nd pick. And if Tennessee skips or passes on a quarterback, they'll absolutely take one with the 2nd pick. I'm convinced of that. I would bet my life that the Browns pick at number 2 as a quarterback, given the amount of money they have invested in Deshaun Watson. It's the only way they can get a good one is by drafting him. All right, Giants and Packers. I only put the Packers in here with the Giants because that's where Aaron Rodgers won his 4 MVPs, and that's where he'll be remembered for playing as a Hall of Fame quarterback who won Super Bowl 45 there and everything else. And then the Giants, obviously, because now that they were also one of the losers in the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes, the reports are that the Giants are looking into Aaron Rodgers. And this is why, by the way, this is why you don't bring back a GM and coach who feel like if they don't win this year, they're gone. This is what happens when you do that, because it's a desperation move. It's a self-preservation move by them. The Giants' offensive line has been awful. You watched Hard Knocks. If you watched Hard Knocks, the offseason Hard Knocks, their GM Joe Shane said, "I don't think Patrick Mahomes could have played behind this line." And after watching Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl with Kansas City, that actually looked like a decent point. You've got Malik Neighbors, great, but you don't really have anything else there. Tracy, the running back's okay. Why would you make the same mistake that the team that shares your stadium just made with a guy? It's mind-boggling. And it doesn't sound like it's Aaron Rodgers' camp just trying to get a message out there. It sounds like the Giants are actually open to this idea, which I think is farcical and speaks to how far they've fallen since they won their last Super Bowl in 2011, where they're actually contemplating this move. Go young at the position, take another swing. Daniel Jones didn't work. Who cares? Try somebody else who's young and new and see where it goes. And I'll say this, well, I'm going to save it for the next New York team when we get there in a little bit. Lions and Cowboys. I put these two together because Myles Garrett still wants out. He made that clear again, Combine week. The Browns still say it won't happen. Which side gets its way? And if Garrett gets his way, I could see the Lions or Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys seem far-fetched because they've got Micah Parsons there, and they just paid Dak, and they just paid CeeDee Lamb. But this is actually the kind of move that I could see Jerry Jones making, and let me just tell you why that is. Jerry Jones loves when he gets credit for doing, savvy, or I would say, like when he gets credit for doing, like when he gets credit for either drafting a guy or making a move. If he does the obvious thing, when Jerry Jones, not that they've had a lot of like super high picks, but when he just takes the obvious guy, or they make kind of a ho-hum free agent signing, he gets no shine for that. Okay. He gets no credit. He's a guy that is so vain and so motivated by, I think, his own narcissism. He gave up on Jimmy Johnson, or got rid of Jimmy Johnson, because he wanted to win his way. It wasn't good enough for him to win with somebody else getting credit. Jimmy Johnson made the key Herschel Walker trade that led to that dynasty, not Jerry Jones. And so I think Jerry has kind of chased that Moby Dick for his entire life post their 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. And so I think like Dak Prescott, he loved that move because he gets credit for finding him in the 4th round. Tony Romo, undrafted, he gets credit for finding a guy from a little college like Eastern Illinois. He would get tons of praise if he was able to like move the salary cap around and bring in a dude of Myles Garrett's ability. And before people say, well, it can't happen because of the cap, I mean, the Eagles are also being linked to Garrett. And look at all the money they've laid out to Hurts and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and the guys on their offensive line. So where there's a will, there's a way. The Lions are the team that I think has to make the trade. I think they need to, like, you get windows to win in professional sports. Don't think about it in perpetuity, like we want to be good for the next 10 years. Screw that. You want to try to win right now. And pairing Garrett with Aiden Hutchinson, I think, would make up for the coordinators there, both taking head coaching jobs. Broncos and Panthers. These are the 2 teams looking into signing Zach Bond, the Eagles inside linebacker who almost won Defensive Player of the Year and was signed for, I think, a 1-year, $5 million deal, and now goes back into free agency. And I think he's going to try to break the bank. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He hit pay dirt. He went to the exact right situation, and he's going to try now, I think, to capitalize on it. And he should. That's his right. But I do think he's a byproduct of the Eagles system. Everything about his playing career to this point says it's because of the defense he played in and the people around him and the guy calling the shots. So if you're the Broncos, why do it when you had such a great defense last year? Probably the best in the AFC for me, player for player. In terms of getting a lot out of guys. Surtain won the Defensive Player of the Year award. But it's not like they have a ton of like huge contracts on the books. I mean, he comes from his NFL dad was a really good corner. So great gene pool there. I mean, everyone knew he was going to be a phenomenal player. But everyone else on the Denver defense came out of nowhere last year. I wouldn't want to then pay a premium on an off-ball linebacker. I think Carolina will probably be the team that ends up signing him because they had the worst defense in the league last year, and they do have some money to throw around. Not as much as you'd think for being a bad team, but they do have some. And so I think that's where Zach Bond ends up, is with the Carolina Panthers. But I think that's going to end up being a bad contract. If he's smart, well, it depends. If he wants to continue to thrive, then he'll take less to stay in Philadelphia. If it's about maximizing his money-making and financial future, then he'll probably just go to the highest bidder. But I think there's a good chance Zach Bond just goes back to being an average linebacker with his new team. Jaguars, Colts. I put these 2 together because they're both in the AFC South. The word from the combine is that Indy wants to bring in a quarterback to compete with Anthony Richardson. That is horrible news for Richardson. You might as well, in addition to everything that happened with him last year, you might as well sell the house now and recoup the money and start looking for a more permanent abode, more permanent home, because look at the free agent market. It's not like there's a big name out there, someone that they could go get that you would say, we think our starting quarterback has potential, but we just couldn't pass up this guy. We couldn't look the other way at an opportunity like this. Anthony Richardson is going to end up competing with like a Daniel Jones or somebody like that for the job. And that just goes to show you how much he's lost the confidence of the coaching staff and GM there. This was the risk in drafting him. I thought, again, dumb take. I thought the guy had elite physical traits, and so he was worth a flyer. The Colts gambled, and injuries, and I think immaturity, and just a raw guy that some of them never develop. Whether that's just it's not in there or they don't apply themselves, whatever it is. You know, the Colts are going to be stuck, I think, in this limbo this year where they need to see one more subpar year from Anthony Richardson before they move on. And my guess is that's how I think it's going to have a very ugly ending there. And Anthony Richardson is going to be someone who bounces around to a couple more teams like we've seen Trey Lance do because of where he was drafted and the arm talent and the running ability, but is just never able to put it all together. Jets and Falcons. How much sense does Kirk Cousins to New York make? My answer is a lot. I think a lot. And it's outdoors, and Cousins has played, his last two teams have been dome teams. But he did play in Washington when he was younger, and it's not like Washington is 75 degrees and sunny every day. So we know that he has the potential to cut it loose in places where in November and December and January, the weather can be a factor. He's going to come so cheap. And any team out there that is thinking between like these four names, Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, and Kirk Cousins, and I'm going to throw Aaron Rodgers in there too, but obviously he's not going to go back to the Jets, should sign Cousins. I'm not overly optimistic that he's going to go back to the guy he was a couple of years ago, but he's an extra year removed from the foot injury. And he said he was having shoulder issues last year too. Now, maybe that's a chronic thing that never goes away. Maybe it's something that it's a career ender for him. It's something that he just can't get over. He is getting close to 40. But why would you sink money into mediocre quarterback play when you can pay very little and probably get mediocre quarterback play? There's a few guys like that on the market this year because I don't see a big gap between Darnold, Fields, and those guys, even down to like Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins. I'd rather pay less. If I'm signing up for average quarterback play, why overpay for it? So Aaron Glenn, you might say, like, is that how he wants to start his tenure as Jets coach? Well, what are the alternatives? They're not going to take Jackson Dart where they're picking, or, I mean, hell, you could even do that. I mean, if you wanted to take Dart in the second round or move up into the back part of the first round to take them and have Cousins and Dart there, that's not a lot of cap space. And we saw Cousins was at least a good soldier when Penix replaced him last year. All right, we're winding down here. Ravens and Texans. These are two teams that don't have a lot of money to add a big free agent. Is that bad? No, it's not. It's not bad for the Ravens because guys like Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum need to get paid. They need to, I think, obviously still get better at wide receiver after Zay Flowers, but they can roll the dice and see if they can get someone in the draft to do that, maybe at the end of the first round, like a Luther Burden from Missouri. And then with Houston, okay, they're going to lose Stephon Diggs. And who knows what happens with Tank Dell. But I have a hard time believing their line is going to be as bad as last year. 2 years ago, their line was just okay. And Stroud was one of the most accurate quarterbacks and one of the best decision makers in the NFL. Last year, it was absolutely awful. And they made an offensive coordinator change there. So I actually think Houston is a decent candidate to have a rebound year and have a big bounce back year. And the Ravens are what they are. Their big splashy move was Derrick Henry last year. They're not going to make something like that. And they're just going to hope for better luck in the playoffs for once. Last one, Dolphins and Saints. Dolphins barely have any cap money either. They pretty much are what they are with Tua and Tyreek Hill coming back and just hoping that their offense can find its groove again. The Saints are $45 million over the salary cap. The salary cap just went up by another $30 million. I have no idea how that's possible. How is a team that bad, that average, that like perpetually 7-10, 8-9, 9-8 every year? How are they in such cap hell? And how does the GM there never pay for it? This is what happened in New Orleans, this coaching cycle. What should have happened to them is what happened to Jacksonville. They interviewed people. They figured out the GM there. No one wanted to work with. So what did they do? They fired the GM and hired Liam Cohen. The Saints should have fired Mickey Loomis. He's been there since they won their Super Bowl. It's like he got a lifetime contract ever since then because he was able to bring a title to New Orleans. And for whatever reason, they won't cut him loose. If he's then get a new cap guy. Get a math wizard in there. Get someone who knows the numbers of football and can manipulate them. I don't care. But to do what they're doing year in and year out, to always have no money is why they are what they are. They're paying Derek Carr all that money, and we don't even know how many games he's going to start or what's going to happen to him this year. All right, so there you go. That's our NFL free agent preview. Remember, listen and subscribe to First and Pod. You can do it on the Odyssey app. We're available wherever you get podcasts. Just search 1ST @ Pod to find us. Patrick Peterson will be back next week. We will give you a robust analysis of everything that happened in free agency, and we'll see how many of these predictions come true. For Spencer Ray, I'm Andrew Fillipponi. Thanks for listening to First and Pod.